Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the second day of our Superintendent Search Finalist interviews. I welcome everyone here and my colleagues. I thank you for all the participation yesterday and attending our dinners and our meet and greets. Good morning, Mr. Heid.
Good morning.
My name is Lori Cunningham, and I serve as the chairman of the Polk County School Board. We welcome you to beautiful Polk County. We are so delighted to have you here with us for an opportunity to get to know you better and for an opportunity for you to learn a little bit more about us. What I'd like to do now is to introduce my esteemed colleagues on the school board. So, representing District 1 is Dr. William Allen.
Good morning.
District 2 is represented by myself. District 3 is Miss Sarah Fortney.
Happy Earth Day.
Good morning.
District 4 is Miss Sarah Beth Reynolds.
Good morning.
Good morning.
District 5 is Mrs. Kay Fields.
Morning.
Good morning.
District 6 is Mr. Lynn Wilson.
Good morning, sir.
And District 7 is Mrs. Lisa Miller.
Good morning.
Good morning.
And at this time, I'd like to introduce a few staff members that are with us today. We have Mr. Wes Bridges, who is our general counsel for the school board.
Good morning, sir.
And Miss Linda Baldick, who is our executive secretary for the school board. And all the way in the back is Miss Wendy Winchester, who's the executive assistant to the superintendent for our county. And everybody is wonderful and does a wonderful job for us. We're a great team here in Polk County. Now I'd like to just take a couple of minutes and review the interview process and timeline with you, just so you have an idea how we're going to proceed.
Yes, ma'am.
We will have 2 hours now for the board interviews. Then you will have, in the beginning, here in a few minutes, you will have 5 minutes for an opening statement. And then each board member will ask a series of thematically based questions, such as student accountability, operations management, instructional leadership, and so on. Each board member will have around 15 minutes to ask you 4 to 5 questions, and the number of questions will depend on the time of the responses, because we're trying to keep it to 15 minutes per board member in order to stay within our allotted time. I will signal you, myself or Ms. Messina, if we've got 2 minutes left. It's been working fine throughout the past interviews.
Yes, ma'am.
You will have time at the end of the interview for a closing statement or any final thoughts and or questions that you may have. We will be taking notes during the interview so that we can be able to go back and discuss information as we deliberate our final decision. So I'd just like to let folks know that we'll be doing that. Do you have any questions before
No,
we
ma'am.
proceed? Okay. All right. So, Mr. Heid, we will start with allowing you around 5 minutes for any opening comments you may have or any thoughts that you would like to share with our board this morning.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here this morning. Thank you. You've all been very gracious. I'll begin today by thanking somebody else in the room and recognizing my wife. Patty Heid is here with me. She has been my partner for over 27 years. We'll be together 30 years this November. And she's been an amazing mom, amazing partner, amazing wife. I truly do not believe that I am the man who I am today without my mother or without my wife's influence. I can assure you that. She keeps me on a straight and narrow as much as possible. But I did want to recognize her because of her commitment, the opportunities she's presented me to fulfill my mission objective and my calling to be an educator. In addition to that, I'd like to say thank you to the search committee. I'd also like to thank the group that provided us with the tours yesterday. It was incredibly impressive. There are a lot of attractive reasons to come to Polk County as a superintendent. There are a lot of highlights, a lot of opportunities here. But I will tell you, the community champions that we had an opportunity to listen to yesterday just reaffirmed a sincere interest in coming to Polk County. The relationships, the partnerships that you've established cohesively, collaboratively across 17 municipalities was incredibly impressive. the tour of the art museum and the student artwork and their partnerships in our schools is incredibly impressive. Again, it was a very long day. We saw a great deal of the community. We got to see, quite honestly, 2 bookmark ends of our school district, and with very diverse and disparate needs. And quite honestly, again, that just resonates the opportunities that lie here to continue to push forward to meet the needs of all learners, and all means all. So it is my I'm sincerely appreciative of the opportunity to be here before you today, having been selected as a finalist, so thank you.
Okay, well, thank you for that opening statement. I will begin the interview today with a few general topic questions, and then we'll move to each board member. Please take a moment and introduce yourself, and if you could choose one word or one phrase that best describes you, what would it be and why?
Oh. So again, my name is Frederick Heid. One word. Committed.
Okay. And why?
It has been my mission in public education to rise above politics, to rise above and beyond personal beliefs and perceptions, to get beyond the emotion, to remain focused on our children. So committed is, regardless of the difficulties, regardless of the road, regardless of what barriers may be real or perceived, to continue to remain focused on student outcomes and supporting our staff so that they can best attain those. And that, I believe that word best reflects and is, quite honestly, is represented throughout my resume and my accomplishments to date.
Okay. All right. Mr. Heid, could you give us a glimpse into your transition style? Please share how you will get to know our school district, learn about our staff, fabulous staff, our wonderful programs, evaluate our budgets, financials, and integrate into the community that you spoke about earlier.
Yes, ma'am. I've selected a superintendent. I believe, and the board will make a decision, I believe, in the next week on the 27th. And so if apprised or if appointed as the next superintendent for Polk County Public Schools, I think the work begins immediately while I transition my district to its next leadership. And we have already established some recommendations because of internal succession leadership that we've established. There are opportunities there for them. I begin a sincere focus on the transition opportunities here. So that begins with a conversation with board members, begins with a conversation again with many of our community leaders and with Superintendent Byrd and her team to begin to define a true 90-day transition plan. I do believe oftentimes you can come into a school district and presume to just hand off a 90-day plan, but I think there's a lot of collaboration and discussion and listening that has to occur before that plan is established. Part of that, for example, is you are on the tail ends of your current strategic plan. You will need to establish, as a community, we would have to establish a process and a timeline to basically revisit the strategic plan, develop new goals and objectives, timelines, initiatives, and budgets, make sure it's aligned to our budget and our opportunities here in the school district. Meeting staff, a sincere focus throughout the summer months of being as highly visible and interacting with as many internal district staff, external stakeholders, including parents and students, to gain perspective. We learned yesterday on the tour that there are very differing opinions and views and beliefs about how they feel valued as part of the larger community and larger school district as a whole. They were all very responsive as well in sharing that they believe that has changed, but that perception still persists. And so whether it's real or perceived, that narrative is out there. So there's an opportunity to gain knowledge from this. So it's more of a listening tour. And then you come back to the board, you come back to your cabinet, and you start to develop a robust plan for how to address major goals and objectives. Obviously, some of the primary goals is how do I work with the board? What's your preferred communication style? How do I work with cabinet? What's their current style and process for meetings? How are they held accountable? What types of reports do they generate? What type of dashboards are available? Student accountability, and quite honestly, reestablishing a relationship with your collective bargaining unit leadership teams, and really getting at issues of school culture that I've heard resonate over the last 48 hours.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
What is your experience advocating for or against legislative issues that impact school districts?
Yes, ma'am. So I've had quite extensive experience throughout my career. Again, at one point, I was the Bureau Chief for School Improvement for the Florida Department of Education, and very frequently, we were called upon by staff from the Legislative House in session so that we could work with them on proposed policies impacting public education, and many times our role was to basically point out, at times, the flaws. And there were a lot of what I would say were bad policies that we actually were proactively able to prevent from ever coming to the floor. In other opportunities, obviously advocating when I was the Bureau Chief for School Improvement, I testified several times against the need for the lowest 300 schools list. In my opinion, quite frankly, while I believe that literacy and every student has to be literate, every student has to be able to read before graduation, and obviously by specified bench milestones, I think there's also a reality that adding an extra hour at the end of the school day, there were so many inherent flaws with the initial proposals. For example, how to target those students. Can you mandate that for individual students while you let other students leave a building? The other issue is, quite honestly, and I don't mean to speak out of turn, I hope nobody takes this the wrong way, but quite frankly, pushing an additional hour of reading intervention on students is akin to yelling louder at someone who can't hear you. You have to look, reading is approached more comprehensively and collectively across the curriculum and not as an isolated class structure. So I use that example as one where I advocated very aggressively, even while I worked for the state of Florida, because I just didn't feel it was an effective or a best practice for our students. And that a lot of those systems and those processes were already in place. As a school district superintendent, I've been called upon multiple times to testify. Been able to pass successful legislation in Illinois. I partnered with one of our local representatives to pass legislation that allowed for early college, what we call an accelerate college option for students, the first in our state, in Illinois. And have also partnered with legislators to oppose legislation. Our district, for example, suffers because we have tax incentive funds. And so basically tax dollars by local municipalities we lose $17 million a year, for example, in my school district because of tax incentives that are provided for new companies and new businesses, new developments. And while there's a role for a school district to play in growth and overall economic development, it can't happen where the school district's going to be adversely impacted with new students that are coming in without that funding to offset those new students who are enrolling. So we've been able to advocate with and for those policies where it's appropriate, and against policies like economic development areas. For right now, for example, we've been in discussions to eliminate an EDA in my community that actually erodes a lot of our tax base. So been able to work with our legislators to bring those issues to light repeatedly.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Heid, we have several quality finalists for this position.
Yes, ma'am.
Why should the board select you?
I think the board should select me if quite honestly, if my skill set, my demeanor, my approach, my ability to problem solve is in alignment with your vision, and quite honestly, with your personality as a board. The relationship between a superintendent and the school board is another marriage. And quite honestly, it's 8 different personalities who have to come together to collaborate. We're not always going to agree, but we have to work together professionally. We have to work together with one sincere focus and commitment to our staff and our students and our community. With that being said, I would hope that, again, my resume, I applied here because I felt I am a good fit for Polk County Public Schools. I believe that my history, my track record, my experiences, my knowledge, my expertise would be an asset to the school district. And again, if you see alignment there, if you feel that fundamentally that I'm the right person to move forward with you, then thank you very much. I would not have applied if I did not have a sincere interest. But you are absolutely right. You have 5 very strong candidates.
Thank you. And next, we will have Mrs. Fields, who will be asking questions related to board and community relations.
Yes, ma'am.
All right, Mr. Heid, the first question is, when a new superintendent is hired, the goal is to make the transition as smoothly as possible for everyone. How would you help both the educational community and the community at large adjust to the new governance style that would come with the new superintendent? That's a long one.
It is. Thank you. So it's interesting that you used at the end of the question, the phrase, getting them accustomed to a new governance style. Quite honestly, and I have said this repeatedly to people who I've had the opportunity to interact with and speak to both this morning and yesterday, it is not a me. It is very much a we. We lead, we move the district as a cohesive team. And so I am not just representative of my vision, my personality, my beliefs, my leadership style. I am a servant leader. I serve our students and community first, oftentimes at the detriment of my own family time and my own son. But the reality of it is, this is my calling. And so in order to make that transition smoothly, I think you need to be very transparent. I think you need to approach every opportunity with a listening ear. I will hear, guaranteed, if I'm appointed as superintendent, if you do choose to select me, I guarantee I will hear the good, the bad, and the ugly. What I have learned historically or throughout my career is you have to listen to the good, the bad, and the ugly, but you also have to filter. You have to be able to eliminate the raw emotion at times that's driving a topic behind the topic, and be able to focus then on what the real issues are. And so that listening ear with a critical mindset and a critical application of how do we then problem solve this? Is this a collective theme that we hear resonating across communities? How then do we address that? And when I say communities, obviously I'm including all stakeholders. So I think being transparent, establishing opportunities to engage and interact with staff, family members, community leaders on a regular basis. You have that process well in place here. I did ask some questions yesterday about how we track and monitor all of those initiatives at once. So there's an opportunity there, because I think that part of that transparency and how do you adjust, how do we get people to adjust to a new leader, is again by providing reassurances, and also that transparency cannot be understated. People want to understand what's happening. People are not frustrated by decisions. They're frustrated by the lack of information behind a decision. And I have learned that throughout my career, and that's why I have that mindset. I also believe that giving them an opportunity and a voice. You have some incredibly strong systems in place now, communities, partnerships, that can all continue to be accentuated, and utilized, because those become our voices in the community. Those become an extension of the school district. And so by maintaining those relationships and making sure that we are all on one same page with one common mindset, one common vision for the school district, is how you build that comfort and how you build and support that effective transition. But there's also opportunities, as you know, video messaging, community events, meet and greets, being highly visible at school events, being visible in schools. One of the things I did upon my initial transition in my current role was met with union leadership, and I visited every school, spent the entire day in a school, and staff had the opportunity to come in and meet with me, and union leadership was there so that they could hear the same things I was hearing. And that's how we actually started to rebuild the relationship between our collective bargaining units in the school district, because it was quite adversarial when I first arrived there. And that built trust, because we heard the same things, and then we started to problem solve, how do we approach those? I think you have to use the same thing through parent groups. Many of our parent groups exist. Do they feel empowered? So there's a lot more to that question. It's a long question, a long answer, but it's one that's quite comprehensive. So thank you.
It is quite long, and you did a very good answer.
Oh, thank you.
Gave a very, very good answer. In your role as superintendent, how would you ensure all stakeholder groups are fully engaged with schools? And why is diversity important to you, and how do you ensure it?
Yes, ma'am. So first and foremost, engagement is both opportunity and a sincere opportunity. And something that parents, for example, volunteering in a school at the elementary level is something that happens quite frequently. We can get retirees to volunteer in our elementary schools. We can get community partners to volunteer in elementary schools. Oftentimes it becomes a struggle when we get to middle school and high school. Mm-hmm. The reason for that is it's not always well planned. It's not always as easily done at middle school and high school, but there's also needs to be a sincerity about it. We're not looking for classroom assistants there. We're looking more for mentors and partners. And that kind of leads into your second part of your question about diversity. Our community, the people in our classrooms, the people on our cabinet, the people in every role, the people on the board should be truly representative of our community as a whole. Polk County has seen significant growth in its Hispanic population. That is your majority enrollment right now in our school district. And I would work to make sure that we have representation in that regard. Every school community needs to have a voice, whether it's through their school-based shared decision-making committees, their school improvement plan committees. As you know, you have other committees that meet regularly for your school improvement initiatives currently in your low-performing schools. And so that's part of the process as well. There needs to be a sincerity there in the conversation, that they feel empowered to be part of the process and not just recipients. Parents are most frustrated right now in public education because they feel like they're on the receiving end of public education and not partners in education. So you have to reestablish that relationship with them. Diversity is something that, obviously is very near and dear to my heart. We very recently, within the last year, hired a new director for diversity, equity, and inclusion to address countless issues across the board, not just racial issues, but issues involving our students, quite honestly, whether it's their sexual orientation or whether it's their religious beliefs or the language they speak. Every student should feel welcome in our buildings. And in order to accomplish that, our staff must be reflective of that. Students need to see someone they look up to. The relationship between children and teachers cannot be understated as well. It is incredibly important, but think of the power of students being able to walk into a classroom and seeing themselves represented in the classroom. And so we must do everything we can, whether it's through grow your own programs and partnerships with one of our local universities or colleges, whether it's recruitment, whether it's retention initiatives, but that should be truly representative. And we must have a pipeline to develop young aspiring leaders in our school district as well, and look to ensure that it is a diverse group of individuals.
Thank you. My next question, describe what you believe to be the ideal working relationship with the school board. And when you have an adversarial situation with a school board member, how would you resolve it?
So the ideal situation, quite honestly, is one that I currently benefit from. I work with 7 unique individuals who all have very unique and individual opinions and mindsets, but you work to ensure that your board is well informed, that they are kept on the front end of communication. Nothing goes out to our families right now presently unless they see it. Even if it's a controversial topic, they realize that that's within my purview to push those things. And however, they get to see the communication ahead of time because they're going to hear from constituents. And so you need to be respectful of that. You need to learn what each board member's preferred communication style is. Some board members prefer to meet face-to-face. Others are just fine with a phone call. What's the frequency in which the board would like to be communicated with? Do you want weekly updates, kind of a summary of the school district each week? Obviously, there's an interest that if an emergency arises in our school district, you must be informed, especially if it's within your region, first and foremost, and that communication starts with me and my team. So, part of that process is working together, but also establishing those ground rules. What is within the board's purview, what's within the superintendent's purview, and how then do we effectively solve problems when we find conflicts. When it comes to a board member and conflicts, I have found myself at times, you will find, if you select me, I am a truly passionate educator. My passion comes through in all of our conversations. It is never disrespect, it is never confrontational, but I truly believe in what we do. And so my goal is to make sure that I work with board members collectively. And if we have disagreements, I need to be, again, that listening person to hear really what the issue is. Is it just you have a complete aversion to what's being discussed or proposed? Or is there some underlying or under-themed current that I need to be more cognizant of? How do I help you reconcile that so that you can be more supportive of an initiative or a proposal coming before you? Or, on the other hand, did I miss something? And I have to acknowledge my own failures as a human sometimes, that in an effort to move something forward, I may not have had the listening ear that I should have and not have been attentive to a board member's needs. And so I think what needs to also happen is the board needs to be very open to providing feedback. So if they find themselves in a position where the board felt that, well, this was not enough information, I wish you'd have done this, then I need to make note of that and make sure that I'm approaching you as individuals and not only as a collective board. I do not want to be a superintendent who relies on a 4-3. I'm going to be very honest with you. I do not expect the board to be 7-0 every day. I do not. And I think that that's, quite honestly, it's disingenuous to say that because each of you represents a community and you represent various interests and needs. And so, board uniformity and consensus is rare. However, we can be polite, we can be respectful, we can be professional, and be responsible enough to have an open dialogue with each other to ensure that we maintain an appropriate relationship. This is a marriage. We will be going hand in hand in the future and working very closely together. So I need to be respectful of that, and it goes both ways.
And it is a marriage, and so following up on your comments, and so sometimes when you're in a marriage, at the end of the day, you agree to disagree. And so what happens when you get in a place where you and your partner don't have the same alignment? How do you deal with that? When you've done everything you know to do and you still are not in alignment, how do you deal with that?
Quite frankly, I let the issue pass. I let some time pass, and then we revisit it. Was it my delivery? Was it my personality? Was it the topic? Again, I have no interest in battling with a board member or the board as a whole. I think you need to be respectful of people's views and opinions. At times, we will agree to disagree, and that's okay too. And it doesn't have to lead to controversy, doesn't have to lead to conflict. The only thing I've ever asked of a board is if you have questions or concerns, please apprise me of them before a board meeting so I can be prepared. With full knowledge that questions will arise in the middle of a board meeting, but I have staff who can help me address those questions in real time. But again, if we come to a disagreement, I think we need to be adult enough to walk away from it and let it be, and not talk about it with others. So for example, if you and I were to have a conflict, I'm not about to pick up the phone and call Ms. Cunningham. I'm not about to pick up the phone and call, Ms. Miller or anyone else for that matter. That stays between the two of us. If you choose to share that with the board chair, then that's your purview and your decision. However, my interactions with individual board members are just that. They're my interactions with the board. So I would hope that we could be respectful of each other in that regard.
Good answer. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, my last question. How would you build an open, I think you kind of answered this already, but you might want to add to.
Yes, ma'am.
How would you build an open, trusting relationship with your school board as an entity and each member individually?
Yeah, I think I'm going to be honest with you, and you're probably going to hear this depending on the questions I get. I think it starts with our strategic plan so that we're not deviating from our mission objectives. And I say that not because, and I am a very data-driven leader, school leader, and instructional leader. But first and foremost, the whole purpose of a strategic plan is allows us to remain focused. So the transparency surrounds and our ability to stay on task is best supported by that document. What does it really mean? What does it really entail? I do not believe in strategic plans that are fluffy. I don't believe in the feel-good statements. I believe that they should be data-driven. I believe they should be measurable, and I believe they should be aligned to not only our resources, but to staff. There should be accountability, and that's the transparency, that the board is constantly apprised and updated and informed, that no new initiatives come forward that have not already been vetted. I think one of the opportunities here, especially this morning through my conversations with some of your teachers union members, is where's the collaborative opportunities here? So that when an opportunity or an initiative or a proposal is brought before the board, it's already been vetted. It's already, because we've done it together. And so again, I go back to it's not a me, it's a we. We must lead the school district, and we must be respectful of each other's roles and frustrations and needs in order to do so effectively. And that's outlined, again, those objectives, the goal statements, what our initiatives will be outlined in our next strategic plan. That would be my hope. And I would hope that we start with a portrait of a graduate. What is it we expect of every student upon graduation? Then you start backwards problem solving from there, and through that process, that's how you build trust, that's how you build relationships, and that's how you build transparency. The community will look at that strat plan and know exactly what everyone's job is. And that's part of the misnomers oftentimes in large educational systems is the perception of central office. Those people in that building, what do they do all day? What do they really do all day? If you have an effective strategic plan, it absolutely lays out what those people are focused on each and every day and how they're being held accountable to those outcomes.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next, we will have Dr. Allen, who will be asking questions related to student accountability. Mr. Allen?
Great. Your phrase, the portrait of a graduate, speaks well to this topic. So as we, funnel down and really focus in on that student success conversation, based on what you know about our school system, what do you view as the greatest potential for improvement? And then what are your greatest opportunities that you see?
Yes, so I think, again, let's start with proficiency, literacy. There are some sincere opportunities there. You know, looking at the economic development plan and that the council put out, that they contracted out, education and educational outcomes continue to resonate as a concern. With high school graduation, the district has done an incredible job over the last 4 years improving its overall graduation rate. There are some disparate groups still within the subgroup populations that we have to continue to focus on. So the opportunity is there to refocus on literacy. I had an amazing conversation with a middle school reading teacher just a few moments ago who shared with me that she had a student in her reading class who had every year prior to entering her class had scored a level 5 on a statewide assessment. But for 1 year scored a lower score and now was stuck, and that was the word, stuck in a reading class. The student had no business being in a reading class. So I think there's opportunities to really go back, disaggregate our data, look at opportunities, look at our students, and really redefine what the needs are and how do we best support those. Literacy is something that is unique and has to be approached differently. I think when we look at our data, other than early primary, we will find that most of the issues are not related to phonics. They're related to comprehension. And the only way for students to develop reading comprehension is to read. And for us to have scaffolding instruction where we're actually scaffolding the questions to force students to answer comprehension questions. Do you understand what you just read? We have students with great background vocabulary and great sight fluency and sight words and you know, their ability to read out loud. You know, we used to call it round robin reading back in the day. You know, this was a long time ago. I'm showing my age now. Or, you know, when you pull a popsicle stick with students' names out of a bucket to say, okay, you read next. Do you realize that most students in the classroom who are struggling readers never actually paid attention to what everybody else was reading out loud? They were so focused on reading and rereading the next paragraph, desperate to ensure that when they read, they didn't come across as illiterate. They missed out on the entire process. So there's an opportunity for us to really refocus on literacy. That is where everything starts. And you know, it's a literacy first initiative, but it's literacy across the content areas. Do our science, do our social studies, do our mathematics teachers, and we've been saying this for years, every teacher is a reading teacher. But do they know how to do that? Do they have the skills? Do they have the resources? Do they have the supports? More importantly, do they have the time within the curriculum framework to ensure that they can get at those issues? Those are the unique opportunities here. I think there's clearly, again, after yesterday, and after looking at your magnet programs and your academies, because again, I do have an incoming freshman, and so I will tell you this is something Mrs. Heid is very focused on, and rightfully so. But there's so many potential opportunities there for continued expansion to really get at equity. And I think that's a bigger underlying theme here as well, is equity. How do we ensure that every student has equal access? And let's be honest, every student has equal access. Every student can apply. The problem more times than not, often than not, that prevents students from participation is a logistical issue. The distance from their home to that program. Even your phenomenal aviation program is under-enrolled. And the number one reason cited by district staff was transportation needs. So there are opportunities for us to not only create new opportunities with emerging industries, because let's be honest, POCUS is poised for continued growth and expansion and wants to have a strong presence in technology as well. We heard that resonate multiple times yesterday. Manufacturing is a great growth opportunity for our school district to have alignment for college and career readiness. But in order for those things to happen, we need to make sure that every student has access to those. And I highlighted academies last night at the community meet and greet, and I was very intentional in not mentioning special education, because we cannot go backwards and just assume that not all special education students, because that's a very generic label that we apply to children, are not capable of college readiness. And we have to be very careful that we don't end up tracking students again like we used to countless years ago, where you're not cut out for college, let's put you in a trade. We are not the ones who should be making those decisions, but we should be informing families and providing multiple opportunities to challenge them to be at their best. And defining student potential and student outcomes defined at the individual student level. Where is it you want to go, and how do we best support you? That's a huge shift in education. Instead of us approaching education as a one-size-fits-all, with plenty of opportunities. How then do we individualize the educational experience at the pupil level so that they feel like they're driving everything that's happening around them rather than, again, a passenger for 12 years in our system? So,
Yeah, I appreciate that. Access, really, man, big conversation there. So, with that, thinking about from a student perspective, how have you held, staff members accountable for that student achievement while balancing the demands within the classroom as well?
absolutely. I think we have to be respectful of their time and respectful of their needs and respectful of, and when we say needs, we're talking resources, we're talking coaching, we're talking time. Teachers are incredibly good at their jobs. And more often than not, they are not given the gratitude, the grace, or the respect that they deserve. Every teacher wants to do their best. I tell you, in my 21 years of being in education, I have yet to come across an educator who does not want to teach kids and is not there for the right reason. They may not have the right tools, and that's what leads to frustration. And so a focus and a heavy emphasis on how do we support our staff. Outcomes are going to be there. We're going to hold everyone accountable. The next strategic plan, if I'm your next superintendent, our next strategic plan will have some very aggressive goals for proficiency in reading and proficiency in mathematics, and more importantly, proficiency in science. And yes, I was a middle school science teacher. I will always promote science. However, we have to meet with, sorry, that's not pandering. I swear that's not pandering. If you go back and watch anything, I highlight throughout my resume, I was a middle school science teacher. I loved every minute of it. But I'll be honest with you by saying, part of that too is being respectful and working with teachers. Coaching at times, it's a great initiative, it's a great opportunity. But I have yet to be in a school district where you initiate school level coaching where it doesn't take time to build trust. Far too often, teachers are incredibly proud of what they do, but they're also incredibly intimidated of someone else coming into their classroom and providing feedback, because their biggest worry is that feedback's going to be used in an evaluative manner, and it's going to be used and it's going to be shared. So the coaching employee relationship has to be maintained, and it has to be solidified, and the only thing that has to be shared is I'm working with Mr. Heid on the following. So that way, as a building principal, if I walk into Mr. Hyde's class, I don't turn around and tell Mr. Heid to work on 5 other things. That consistency of purpose and message and developing a coaching plan to support staff is incredibly important. The resource of time, you have early release days now to support professional development and other opportunities, but ensuring that it's appropriate, ensuring that it's aligned to their needs. So for example, you can't hold a generic professional development on how to best instruct vocabulary unless it's content area specific, grade level specific. Because at the end of the day, if you're a teacher who hasn't really taught literacy, how do you go back to your classroom and really implement that at a high level with fidelity? You can't, because you've never done it before. And there isn't a resource to rely on to turn around to and say, how do I do this again? What's the best process? What are the best practices? So providing time for training, providing time for us to push into classrooms, co-teach, and model that, scaffolding that approach where I do, we do, you do mentality, or approach, that modeling where we come in, the coach models it, then they co-teach it, and then the coach takes a back seat and observes the next delivery, so then it can provide feedback, and we're in that continuous improvement model. So part of that is, again, the time, the resources, and ensuring that our staff feel comfortable, they feel supported, and they know what the objective is. Again, take away the evaluation aspect, take away the fear, and open up the possibility for professional growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that definitely resonates with this next question as we think about the evaluative standpoint. So what measures have you used that are outside of, test scores to measure student achievement? I know we're in relation to teachers here, but focusing that on student achievement, and why do you use these alternative measures?
Sure. So we use not only statewide assessment data, we use ongoing progress monitoring data. Mm-hmm. We also use teacher feedback, peer feedback. We utilize also in our evaluation system in Illinois, teachers have the option of either taking their school data, or they can actually submit a portfolio which indicates and actually can speak to their work. it's far more important too to be present in the classroom on a regular basis. Those frequent pop-in visits and then informality in which those occur. More growth results from that sincere interaction than one that is pre-scheduled, that pre-conference, and that is something we get forced to go through, and it is part of our overall district policy in every school district. But there is a reality that more occurs in those sincere impersonal interactions through direct observation of classrooms. The frequency of classroom visitation should not be perceived to be a negative. One of the things I will tell you, if I'm appointed as your next superintendent, when I visit schools, and this may rub some of you the wrong way, but I think you need to know exactly who I am and how I lead. I will not always wear a tie, and I will not always wear a suit jacket. The minute a suit walks into a building, everybody's alarms go off. You need to be in the classroom. You also need to establish a system where your visibility is such that your presence in the building is not disruptive.
That's
They
right.
should know that you and your team members, whether it's extension of your cabinet, 'cause it's a very large district. I'd love to be able to say I can get to every school in one day. I learned a very real-world experience yesterday of transitioning to Davenport and back. I will tell you, you're not getting anywhere quickly in Polk County at any time of the day, it seemed like yesterday. But without knowing some of the back roads, I'm sure, or a police escort, as somebody mentioned yesterday. But I think that visibility, that transparency, that honesty, that trust, very often when you visit classrooms and somebody brings up an issue, I'll say, do me a favor if I don't have my pen and paper with me, because I don't like being on my phone when I'm in classrooms. And so note-taking on there is not an option. I'll basically say, please make sure you send me an email to follow up on our conversation, and I will get back to you. And then I have that conversation with them, or I bring it to a cabinet member, or I bring it to the right person, and we discuss this. I start first with information gathering and then address the issue. So, you have to build that trust, you have to build that rapport. But to evaluate teachers, I think we have to be respectful of our building principles and what they observe every single day. We have to look beyond the student data. We have to look at other indicators, so those leading and lagging indicators. Are they participating in professional development? Do we see improvement from year to year? I think student learning gains are far more important at times than just proficiency score alone. Are our students learning every single year? We must close the gap. Please don't misconstrue what I just said as ignoring students not being at a level of proficient, and that's sometimes an anomalous number that someone else establishes for us. But at the end of the day, we have to make sure that students are growing every single day, every single year. And I think that data speaks more to how our teachers are performing and listening to them. Establishing, like I said, instructional reviews, instructional rounding, very powerful, empowering our teachers to visit each other's classrooms and learn best practices from each other. All of that feeds back into the evaluation process. Are they growing as professionals? Are our students benefiting from their relationship and their instruction in the classroom?
Great. Last question for you here. High stakes testing of students, it's definitely been praised and, criticized. What are your thoughts and why?
It's not going away. I believe in accountability. I will say that. I do. I believe that an overemphasis on proficiency, and at times a proficiency score that, research-wise, we could have a lot of discussion and debate whether or not the metrics and the thresholds are established where they should be. But I think that, quite honestly, that we need to be held accountable for what we do every day. Student test scores are an important part of that. Student outcomes, more importantly, are a part of that. I think if you have a high graduation rate, that's reflective of our commitment and sincere commitment over 12 years or 13 years if they started in pre-K to our students. So I do believe in assessments. However, I will say this. One of the benefits in the Florida accountability system is the growth metric. I will absolutely say, as a superintendent, if a student enters public school and is not reading on grade level starting in grade 3, but by the time they get to grade 12, we have not closed that gap. We have failed. We have. And it's not just a failure. Please make sure, and I want to make sure this comes across the right way. It's not a failure because teachers didn't work hard. The reality of it is, many times we're not really aware of what's preventing students from being able to attain that level of proficiency in school. What background issues are preventing that? In my own district, we have a program called the Dream Academy, where we've identified students in one of my Title I elementary schools where over 90% of them are on free or reduced lunch. It's largely Hispanic, African American, Black community, and we created the DREAM program. We identified students who have suffered 4 or more adverse childhood experiences. And through the use of cognitive behavioral therapy and wraparound services, we have virtually eliminated hospitalizations, we have virtually eliminated absentee and truancy, and they are now scoring commensurately with their grade level peers. That's how, but that's a realistic approach. Students have been receiving reading intervention year after year after year, and yet we don't see the gap closing many times. We're not addressing the root issue of causation. We have to get back to what's preventing the learner from engaging. And sometimes it's their own perception of themselves. Why am I stuck in this literacy class? I can't imagine what that middle school student felt like who had repeatedly scored at level 5 and now looked at their schedule, lost an elective that they truly might have valued, and now they're in an additional reading class. That child had no business being in that reading class. If that's a true story, that's criminal and should not be happening. And so there are opportunities there for us to identify where the real issues and barriers to learning are. And I think we have to focus on that. So,
Thank you.
thank
Awesome.
Thank you, Dr. Allen. Next, we will have Mrs. Miller, who will be asking questions related to operations management. Mrs. Miller?
Thank you. My first question, for smooth operations across divisions, it's important to build a leadership pipeline. Please discuss your approach to ensuring qualified leadership in all areas, including the district office.
Yes, ma'am. It begins with teacher mentorship, teacher leadership, opportunities for our paraeducators to further themselves. So in partnerships with our local colleges, universities, a +2 program is often what we use. Again, as we continue to struggle to find qualified applicants to fill many of our classroom roles, we fail sometimes to look within and provide those opportunities for growth and promotion. So that's a leadership pipeline. How do we empower our paraeducators to take that next step if they so choose? Also to work with our building instructional staff and providing a pipeline of leadership opportunity for them. How do we develop them as leaders? What are the opportunities for them in instructional coaching roles, in other roles such as a dean or an assistant principal, and in a principal's pipeline, but that's for another group. And so once they move into a leadership role, establishing a pipeline where they can actually learn and grow and become the next, you can build a deeper bench of having people who are aligned, who are ready to be your next assistant principal. Once you have the assistant principal pipeline developed, you have to develop your principal pipeline and also your district leadership pipeline. So looking at the talents, looking at your current cabinet, what deficiencies do you have to offset? And that's going to come across as a negative, but because you use the word deficiency, but at the end of the day, your leadership team should be balanced. It should absolutely be balanced. Not everyone can be in agreement. Not everyone has to have the same, alignment, perceptions, but you want everyone to have a skill set of professionalism, transparency, honesty, and quite honestly, accountability. So at the end of the day, part of that process is working collaboratively with our building leaders, identifying prospective leaders, encouraging them, working with our collective bargaining units, because oftentimes there's a fear point there. But there are classroom level leadership roles that you can use as that initial place to grow your next group of leaders over the next 3 to 5 years.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Besides salary increases, what rewards can you offer employees that would help them feel respected, valued, and needed? Because there's not much money here in Florida, Mr. Heid.
It's not being your superintendent and not having, that is an interesting question. So what can you offer employees? You can offer them respect, you can offer them support, you can offer them opportunity. And I think, and you have to also offer them, your sincere admiration. You have to check in with staff. I had an interaction with a young lady last night at the meet and greet, 27-year veteran, and I so desperately wanted to just give her a hug. She felt that bad. She did, and I feel for her. And I told her repeatedly, no matter what happens, whether I'm your next superintendent or not, I want to thank you for almost 30 years of service to children, because you need to hear that right now. She's really struggling. And I promised her that if I was the superintendent, I will follow up with her. I will find her and follow up with her. But I think, in a limited situation, you can also offer staff a voice. You know, what I've heard resonate and what has been very successful in my leadership, my current leadership, in my district, when we had to rebuild the relationships between the union and the school district and the unions and our board, was establishing collaborative processes, collaborative councils. So they have a voice in everything that goes on in the school district. It's not necessarily a decision-making body, but we do get their perspective. We also work very closely with them. So just as I shared earlier that I would provide messaging to the school board before it goes out to families and staff, I do that now with my collective bargaining units. I said, here's a memo, you know, on the topic we've been working on, you know, what do you guys think? And oftentimes I'll get feedback saying, you know, this line's a trigger. If you keep this in here, people still hang on to the past. And even though we've had 7 successful years, they still think about, you know, people saying, well, this is a management right. That's not how I lead. It's just not. We arrive at decisions. My role is to make tough decisions, but also it's to make sure that I am, again, attentive to everyone else's concerns and voice. And I work for a board, and I bring those issues to you. But teachers need a voice, and they want to feel heard. They want to know that they're respected in their roles and that they are true contributors to our next iteration of our strat plan and where this district is headed, because let's be honest, without them, we're not going anywhere moving forward.
Absolutely. Thank you for highlighting that. The next question, which you kind of touched on, is what is the ideal communication process between the superintendent's office and employees at school sites and departments throughout the district?
Absolutely. So I'll start with school sites and employees. Again, regular updates, 411s that typically follow board meetings so that they can get a summary of what transpired if you don't currently have that process, or how can that be tweaked or refined. Monthly video messaging so that they feel connected. It's more of a personal touch because, again, in a district this size, the inability to actually be everywhere. Hosting town hall meetings, whether they're virtual or in person, provide an opportunity for direct interaction and input, fielding questions. So both written, you know, obviously virtual opportunities exist, but I do believe, again, specific to your question, making sure that they are well informed, that they're on the front end of information. Oftentimes, and I made this mistake early on in my leadership career, I would send something out that we had been vetted, we always worked collaboratively, but maybe the messaging through the union channels hadn't made it to teachers yet, and I assumed it had, and it went out to staff. Well, many of my staff are also parents in the district, and that would frustrate them. Why are parents getting this before we're getting it? So establishing a timeline and a process for communication is also very, very important, so that everyone feels very well informed. Not everyone's always going to agree, right? But telling somebody how you arrived at a decision is far more valuable.
Thank you. What is your experience in leading a facilities renovation and building program in a fast-growing district?
Absolutely. So we have been, because of our student growth, we've been building additions. We've built 2 recent additions onto our elementary schools due to growth in 2 of our communities, Hampshire and the Gilbert's area. We are currently in the process of building an elementary school in Pingree Grove. So I'm well versed in the process of how to vet that, bring that to the board, secure the financing and the funding, and work with the community, because the next step obviously is going to be how do we address rezoning. Anytime you build a new school, rezoning is always a hot topic. Also ensuring that there is adequate space in a school for anticipated future growth and or the potential for a programmatic expansion. Are there new programs or new initiatives that we'd like to see there and that we can best support? So for example, like many of your academies, do we have that space? And so we also, as a school district, adopted, as you should have seen in my resume, adopted a master facility plan. I know in a spreadsheet when every single mechanical system was installed, when it's expected to reach the end of its life expectancy, and at what stages we will start to evaluate that system for potential replacement, and what the expected costs are, so that all of that is budgeted out for the next 10 years. We know exactly where our schools are, whether it's roofing, whether it's HVAC, whether it's plumbing, whether it's maintenance. All of those things are in alignment. And you must have a master facilities plan like that, as you do. But I believe, if I'm correct, that may be expiring soon, or may need a revision because your growth has been so exceptional. You may have to revisit that plan to make modifications to it. Because if I recall correctly, again, from memory, Davenport grew 104%. And the county as a whole continues to outpace state growth. So I believe, if the numbers are accurate, that, as it was shared with us yesterday, if you're truly anticipating an additional 45,000 students by the year 2045, I think you're probably going to be closer to 2035 or 2037. So I think working now to address those issues makes a great deal of sense. But I do have experience with all of those areas.
Thank you. My last question is, describe your ability to cultivate a disciplined, safe, and orderly school environment.
Absolutely. Everything starts with a school being safe and conducive to actually teaching and learning. Students need to understand that there are expectations. We have to be systematic in our approach to dealing with student issues, behavioral issues, and outcomes, and let's be honest, including employee behavioral issues and outcomes. But I do believe in restorative practices. I do believe in the fact that you can't just simply suspend behaviors and not remediate the student. I also believe we have to be respectful of the fact, as I shared previously, what are the root issues and issues of causation? Are our staff able to learn and pick up on those cues that a student is in crisis? And this is how it's manifesting, is through an outward expression of behavior and anger or frustration. Do we know how to de-escalate those situations? Do we know where to send that student? So we get them out of class, send them to a counselor, let them de-escalate the student. But we have to be considerate of the fact that there's a lot going on in our children's lives. We will see a lot more of that over the next 2 to 3 years. If the research holds, post-COVID, we will see more student issues with social emotional related issues and mental health issues than we've ever seen before. And we need to be poised to address those things. Student discipline, again, you must have a climate that is safe and conducive to supporting instruction. Teachers also need to understand the classroom is a safe place for them, that they can teach without disruption. So giving them the tools, giving them the resources, and the training so that they can find that middle ground. Restorative practices are very important. So when a student is suspended, so for example, if a student walks out of a classroom and uses an expletive, there's a very big difference, and you may disagree, and I understand that, between a student muttering under their breath a profanity or looking you in the face and calling you profanity. Those are two vastly different things, right? And they should be addressed differently. But we also have to have a progressive disciplinary process, one that ensures that every behavior somehow gets looped back for an opportunity for that student to apologize and to rebuild a relationship with whomever they had a conflict with, whether it's a peer, whether it's an adult, whether it's an administrator, who are adults. They must have that opportunity for restorative. That does not mean that you're not holding children accountable. We've had restorative practices, and we rewrote my student code of conduct several years ago. Our progressive discipline is quite exceptional. However, everyone's being held accountable, but there's opportunities. We also give the schools the latitude to work with the teacher and the student to deviate from that. So even if a student should be on step 3, it's a repeated disruption of a classroom, that would result in an in-school suspension. The principal and the teacher can meet and agree to approach that differently. It's empowering to the teacher, it's empowering to the administrator, and more importantly, it suits the needs of our students. But classroom management is something that must happen. You can't teach in an environment that's chaotic, and students and families need to know that. But we also can't create disproportionality. We have to make sure that we are equitable in how we're approaching all of our students and understanding of their vast differences and needs. That applies also not just along socioeconomic lines and trauma lines, but also, more importantly, along the lines of understanding our students with special needs, and quite honestly, that many of their behaviors are beyond their actual control. So that's important to understand as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Mrs. Miller. Next, we will have Ms. Fortney, who will be asking questions related to instructional leadership.
Yes, ma'am.
This one's kind of long. What are the most important current issues facing school-level administrators? What is the district's role in addressing those issues? And how did you personally influence school culture as a principal and/or district-level administrator?
Okay, I'm going to ask you to read that to me one more time, if you don't mind.
Sure. What are the most important current issues facing school-level administrators? What is the district's role in addressing these issues? How did you personally influence school culture as a principal and/or district-level administrator?
Okay. So let's start with the most important.
Scaffolded question.
Yes, ma'am. Beyond that, actually, more of a,
I'm not gonna argue with you.
yes, ma'am. The most important issues facing our school administrators, there's obviously the pressure for outcomes, student outcomes, but there's also their ability to maintain their staff, the morale, the culture within their building, meet the needs of their communities, which can be vastly different. Many of our, and again, based off your tours yesterday, a building principal in one community who very well may have the same demographic enrollment as a building principal in a neighboring community may have vastly different needs. So in order for them to address those issues, they need to know that the district is there to support them and also recognize their individuality. The district must manage at scale. You must. There's economy of scale. So when it comes to procurements, when it comes to curriculum alignment, those types of things. However, that then presents the opportunity that how do you individualize that then at the school level? How do you work with them so that, yes, we have a curriculum framework. Yes, we have a pacing guide. But when we walk through a classroom, and if a teacher is a week or two off the pacing guide, there's an opportunity for a discussion, right? That building principal doesn't feel like you must be lockstep with that pacing guide or else. That can't be the culture in our buildings. And I think that oftentimes, more often than not, that's their frustrations. Ensuring that, and having been a building principal and currently working with building principals who share their own frustrations, they have put themselves second. COVID has been incredibly impactful and incredibly frustrating to them. I had a great opportunity to speak with one of your building principals yesterday who shared the story again of one of his students who has been quarantined, I believe, six to 8 times throughout COVID. And that's incredibly stressful. We carry those burdens as school leaders. That's our family. It's interesting. We're incredibly protective of our classroom. Teachers are that way with their students. We're that way. Building principals are that way with their staff, and I'm that way with my building principals. I can say whatever I want. It's very much the playground mentality. I can say whatever I want about a building principal behind closed doors, but nobody else better, because I'm going to protect and defend that individual. And so I think we need to be considerate of the pressures that are on them. And that gets back to that collaborative process that I talked about, the collaborative councils. Building administrators sit on that. They're part of the decision making. District level decisions are not made in isolation, should not be made in isolation and outside of building leader participation. There are times where you have to because of expediency or need, but more often than not, the topic's already been addressed and it's just the next iteration of your plan. So I think, obviously finances also remain a frustration for them. Do they have enough staff? Are their classroom sizes adequate? Are they over capacity? I've heard the growth and the impact on capacity repeatedly. They don't feel effective. As I shared earlier, we don't have a teacher who doesn't care about kids and doesn't want to do a good job. Everyone enters our school building every day, including our administrators, and truly wants to do the best that they can. And they want to know that they're going to be supported and respected for that role that they play. That does not mean we're not holding them accountable, right? But we're there to problem solve with them, not against them. And we have to be considerate and respectful of that and bring them along as well, because there's a growth opportunity. It gets back to leadership development. You may have a building leader who doesn't have a strong background in literacy because they were, for example, in my own experience, I was a science teacher. I had to become really knowledgeable and educated about how to support literacy teachers, how to support proficiency, how to support growth, how to identify the disparate issues that prevent a student from being an effective reader. So we have to provide those supports for them as well. As a school principal, I think I've shared repeatedly throughout the morning, that collaborative structure, that collaborative approach, did the same thing as a building principal. I supported my teachers. I made sure that they understood that they were respected, they were valued. I visited their classrooms on a regular basis, daily, if not every few minutes. They were accustomed to my presence, and so were the students, so it was not a disruption. They knew I was there to support them. They knew I was there. Are you having an issue? What can I do for you? If there was a radio call, I picked up students. I served food in the cafeteria. I cleaned tables in the cafeteria. Again, getting back to that servant leadership approach, I'm a doer. I don't sit back. One of the questions that was asked by the sheriff's office investigator of my team, the only question that they really said, they kind of chuckled and shared this one question with me, which was, what do you think Mr. Heid's biggest difficulty will be transitioning back to a larger district? And they all said the same thing. You better find a way to keep them connected to classrooms. That's what drives me. That's what powers me. That's what fuels me. That's my passion. I will be a very effective leader in the school district. but I will be visible in our classrooms. And just as I did as a building principal, being respectful of everyone's viewpoints, and then being there to support them and push them and encourage them.
I think you already answered that. I'm going to skip it.
Okay.
Specifically, what role have you played in turning around underperforming schools? Give examples with data.
Oh my goodness. So as a building, assistant principal at Booker Middle School in Sarasota County Public Schools, we turned around a low-performing, or as a teacher, at Booker Middle School in Sarasota County. I was instrumental and part of the school advisory committee and working collaboratively with our school principal to improve that school from a D to a C. I then became an assistant principal in Orange County Public Schools and improved Westridge, Middle School in its overall letter grade and its proficiency score again, improving it to a C and a B. And then I became a building principal, inherited 2 low-performing schools. Both had Ds and both were improved. Liberty Middle School improved to an A within 2 years. I was then moved and transitioned to Memorial Middle School, which was a D. I moved it to a C in 8 months, and then I was recruited by the Florida Department of Education to lead school improvement across the state. And so I think that, if you look back to my time when I led differentiated accountability in your regional teams at the time, our partnerships, our relationships transitioned. We moved away from more of the hammer to more of the handshake because we knew we had to be more collaborative with our school districts. Forcing change doesn't happen readily. You have to be, again, considerate of the relationship and the pressures that exist within school systems. Again, moving from that hammer to the handshake, and it's my understanding that much of that relationship still exists across the school districts and in partnership with DA. So specific data, most recently, I will tell you Dundee High School is what would be considered my urban core high school in my community. My son is slated to attend there. And when we arrived there, their graduation rate was 12 percentage points below that of their commensurate high schools in our school district. And I committed myself, because there is somebody sitting in the audience who's going to hold me accountable, is that a quality high school for our son to attend? And quite honestly, it is. We moved them to over 90% graduation rate in 4 years as well. I'm very proud of that work. We have increased our we've virtually eliminated our dropouts through an ALOP program. And again, with the Dream Academy and other things, I think data-wise, our school improvement initiatives had played out.
I have a hard time writing and listening.
It's okay. They'll have a video later.
I forgot, actually.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Me too.
I'm sorry about that. Don't hold it against me.
No, ma'am.
I am accountable, though. What types of programs have you found to be most effective in improving student learning? What do you think makes them effective? How did you evaluate that effectiveness? And how do you communicate that effectiveness
goodness.
to stakeholders?
They gave you, yeah, exactly. Okay.
What'd you say?
You added them all in, so one of your questions is 4 questions in one, but that's okay.
It's
I'm
okay.
tricky.
It's okay. So let's start with first and foremost. I believe in programs where programs are needed, right? At the front end, the most effective thing that's going to elicit change in student outcomes is the teacher in the classroom. Do they have the skills? Do they have the resources? And again, do they have the time to address those things? Differentiating in a classroom, given the amount of instructional time, can be incredibly difficult for our teachers. That's where programs and supplements come into play, where we have interventions. Interventions, again, the fidelity is really important. Are they research-based? Are they appropriate? When I arrived in my current school district, we had, if I recall correctly off the top of my head, because it's been 7 years, I believe we had 17 different reading intervention programs at our elementary schools. Please understand, there was no alignment. No one could tell me, why is a student placed in this reading intervention versus this reading intervention versus this reading? And there was no consistent response. We did not have, tiered interventions. We did not have RTI fully embedded in our school district. And so quite frankly, a lot of this is, I believe in core instruction. I do. I believe we need to work to make sure that our teachers have the tools and the resources and the skills that they can best address any deficiencies in core curricular time. Outside of that, programs do have a value, they have a place, they're very comprehensive. Many of them, unfortunately, are lockstep. Teachers feel constrained. They don't feel the flexibility is there. They don't believe the art of teaching is there, the science of teaching is there, right? Scientifically, this is what should work for children. Some students respond very well to those types of lock and step programs, others do not. Others really need more individual, one-on-one interaction, small table groups, small discussions, and that's at all grade levels. Appropriateness of materials, appropriateness of alignment, pushing more novels, pushing more reading, again, more reading comprehension strategies. So I think from a district standpoint, the process of evaluating would be something that would also be included in my initial transition. What programs do we have? Why do we have them? Who are they serving? Are they working? Why aren't they working? And get a district level perspective, get a community level perspective, and get our teachers' perspective. Because it could be a lack of training. One of the reasons we moved away from 17 reading interventions is in a district my size, considering the amount of retirements and turnover and things, how incredibly difficult it would be to sustain professional development for 17 different reading initiatives alone, on top of everything else. So I think we need to be respectful of that and work very closely with our teachers. Is it a programmatic issue or is it an instructional capacity issue? First and foremost, how do we help them? And then what are they seeing value in? Are they part of that? I know they're part of your curriculum selection process. I do know that. But that's a small group that is often represented. And we all know that that doesn't oftentimes garner the level of involvement we would hope it does from both our families or our staff. So there are opportunities for us to explore which programs work best, which are proving themselves out, but more importantly, the why. Is it the teacher? Is it just you have a rock star teacher and despite a bad program, they're just doing amazing work? Or is it the program? You know, there used to be an attitude that you could adopt a program because they were quote unquote teacher proof. That used to be a common philosophy, and you have to be careful with that because the teachers are the ones interacting with students every day. So. For 6 more questions. I don't even know you, Ms. Fortney. I'm sorry. I don't mean to be unfair.
I know. It's coming. Detail what you've done in the past and what you would do to facilitate the reading proficiency with our students with disabilities, ELL kids, all our diverse populations, and address like your subgroup.
Yeah. Again, let's, because I believe I've addressed a lot of that in other questions, but let me do this. I think first and foremost, too, we also have to get a good read from our students. Is the program appropriate for them? Meaning, do they feel it's belittling, it's demeaning, and it's not appropriate? I used the example of the student previously who was misplaced. Do we have a process for students to exit? Is there an incentive for students to do better, to prove that they're not more than a test score? I found that as a building principal to be incredibly empowering. When you walk into a school building and every student in there somehow is losing their electives because they have to go to reading or math intervention, and you talk to kids, well, I've been in a reading intervention class for 6 years. It's not making a difference for me. I don't care about that class. How do we help them care? Where's the shared accountability? We can keep talking louder at them. They're not hearing us. So how do we help them hear? We create an environment where they're empowered, where they actually, as they make progress, they can go to the reading coach in the school and say, I'd like to be tested to basically be removed from this class. There has to be an exit process. Now, that's a risk you take as a school system, that you're trusting that those students are truly ready to exit that class, and that at the end of the day, their test scores will improve. But that's how you get there. It's shared accountability, it's shared responsibility, but being respectful, in addition to everything I've said already about literacy and development and proficiency, being respectful of our students. Is the intervention appropriate? And I think more than often than not, the feedback we're going to get, and this is not just a Polk issue, this is an everywhere issue, is they feel it's demeaning, and they feel disrespected, and they feel disenfranchised. And we continue that cycle for students year after year after year based on a test score. We can do better.
Yes, we can.
Thank you, Ms. Fortney. Next, we will have Mr. Wilson asking questions related to business services. Mr. Wilson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Heid, good morning.
Good morning, sir.
So we're going to talk a little bit about budget now.
Yes, sir.
Share with us your plans for the district's budget development process, and specifically talk about the involvement of principals, directors, and other administrative staff.
Yeah, I think, Mr. Wilson, you've heard me say repeatedly today that it's a collaborative process. So I think it starts with the reality. What's our revenue? What are our costs? What are our expenditures? And then how are we allocating funds to schools based off need, not just based off a per pupil allocation, but how do we ensure equity across the board for our principals? How do they have a voice? A great example in my school district presently is every single year we have Datacom, we have BudgetCom. BudgetCom occurs before I bring a budget to the board, the school board, for final approval and review. And every single building principal has the opportunity to advocate for additional resources for their school building. But they have to base it off data. They have to base it off a need. And that creates that culture, and it creates buy-in, it creates opportunity, it creates a leadership opportunity for them. They are now truly advocating and serving as the CEO of their school building and for their community. And every one of them may have a disparate need. At times I found that they collectively have met before the meeting and all agreed in consensus, let's all ask for X, and then other times, another example, there was I, as a science teacher, was very alarmed that we did not have robust science in my elementary schools, and I desperately wanted STEM. I did. I wanted a STEM enrichment or elective in my in my elementary buildings. But I also realized we didn't have art, and so instead of hiring 36 STEM teachers, I hired 16 STEM teachers, 18 art teachers, and so we had a more balanced curriculum. But principals led me to that. Principals said, listen, we want art too. We have music, we have all these other things, but we want a balanced curriculum for our students. We want them to have more opportunities to be enriched. And so that was that collaborative process. So there were times even they influenced district level decisions through that collaborative nature and that collaborative discussion. But at the school level, they need to be able to advocate for their needs, whether they're construction needs, and again, that's part of your master facility plan process, or whether that's for student academic needs, staffing needs, all of that has an opportunity to come to the forefront.
Thank you. And kind of expanding on that, what role do you see the board playing in the development of the budget, and how is that facilitated?
Absolutely. So again, making sure that the board is well informed. One of the most frustrating things for any board member new to a board who doesn't have a background in school finance is when you get those spreadsheets and people assume you know what every column means and what every term and definition is, and it should not be your responsibility to have to go pull the red book and define all those terms in Florida standards, but making sure everybody has a solid footing in their budgeting process, that they understand our short-term and long-term financial obligations. What's our bond denting structure? What are our payment schedules look like? And also what our operating costs are, and how do those scale annually based off step and lane and cost of living increases and other increases that we incur. So it's very important that the board be well informed through the committee structure, first and foremost, but also as a collective whole, making staff available to ensure that they're providing enough background information for the board to make informed decisions about school finance. Also understanding where the constraints are. We would love to move money from one fund balance to another fund balance, but at times there are legal implications for that and limitations that are imposed by your state, any state. So we have to be considerate of that. And that's an opportunity to lobby later. So keeping the board well informed, well educated, up to date, but you ultimately approve the budget. And you ultimately should be in a position where any significant changes to the budget in accordance with board policy must be brought back before the board. So that continual transparency is occurring.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
How would you ensure that schools located in under-resourced areas receive the attention and resources that they need?
That was a very common theme yesterday from some of our community leaders, was that they felt that for years their areas, both incorporated and unincorporated, had been overlooked. I did not get that sense today, considering that every one of those communities we drove through were getting multiple school new construction and renovations being done. But there are some very disparate needs in the community. And so I think, again, part of the budgeting process is how are funds allocated to the district? Who are they intended to serve? How do we best utilize those dollars directly to provide those resources to those students? in those schools.
Okay, thank you.
Yes, sir.
And this next question goes to transparency. What is your vision for financial reporting, transparency, and maintaining the public trust in managing the financial affairs of our district in our community?
Yeah, so it's interesting, considering the recent events with your collective bargaining and others, that transparency is definitely something that needs to be enhanced, or that I would recommend. And so there are lots of different ways to do that. A common dashboard on the district website would be a very effective tool that could be updated quarterly, monthly or quarterly, depending on a discussion with the board as to your comfort with how we could report that information, and quite honestly, being respectful of the staff, making sure that they could actually update that information in real time, which they can, but making sure the IT staff could provide that dashboard. So if these are our projected expenses, making sure that parents can track that, right, at the district and at the individual school level would be a very good, useful tool for them. That's ultimately very transparent and allows them to see where additional resources may be remaining at the end of the school year. So for example, if you have a budget roll at the end of the year, why? Where did it come from? Who did it come from? What wasn't done? So we can answer a lot of those questions. Those are questions parents have. Why don't we have enough money to do certain things? I pay this much in taxes and the state gives you the X number of dollars. Why aren't there enough resources? You know, you're very lucky as a school district with the half-penny sales tax to help offset some of your construction debts. But as your school district grows, salaries are continuing to be a concern. I know you continue to work on that. You just resolved an issue with your teachers union. And I have stayed up to date on that. But I think that transparency and reporting quarterly to the board, I believe, along with the strategic plan. Presently, my staff and myself report every single quarter on update for the strategic plan. We show the dashboard, we show where we're making growth, we show where we're not, we show where we're off target, we show where we're exactly on target, but we also provide financial updates as well. So there's an opportunity there to incorporate some of that. So that's how you can ensure that we're being very transparent with our costs and our analysis and our projections to date.
Thank you, Mr. Heid.
You're very welcome, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Wilson. Next, we will have Ms. Reynolds asking questions related to personal leadership. Ms. Reynolds?
Hello.
Good morning.
So the first question is, what is the ideal relationship between law enforcement agencies and the school district in ensuring safe schools?
Absolutely. We must go hand in hand. Again, you must have schools that are safe and conducive to teaching and learning, and there is an element that believes that schools are unfortunately, I'm going to rephrase that. There are people who would love to gain access to our buildings and our staff, whether that's resulting from a family dispute, a custodial dispute, or an issue with spousal abuse, spousal neglect. Those issues, I've dealt with all of those, and we have to have those policies and procedures in place. As a school district leader, I believe in law enforcement having a presence. My school presently has an SRO, a school resource officer, from each of our municipalities in all of our middle schools and high schools. I would love to say that I could expand that to elementary school, but my municipalities are structured and their size prohibits that because we cover 60% of the salaries for each one of our SROs. We would love to budget those dollars, but we can't even arrive at an intergovernmental agreement. So, for example, one of my municipalities' police department is 5 people, including their chief. So to add staff to their budget is very difficult. We continue to look for other options, but there are legal implications and limitations in Illinois that prohibit that at this time. Because right now the law only allows for an armed guard who's law enforcement to be on campus at this time. So I believe that law enforcement plays an important role in helping us maintain our campuses. I also believe it's an opportunity. Law enforcement on a school campus, and I would be surprised if your SROs did not have similar relationships, are very fortunate to be able to work with children one-on-one and have discussions and build relationships. And through those relationships, more often than not, we learn of things before they occur. And so they're able to be proactive. They're also able to reestablish a relationship with people and individuals and our students who may have had a negative interaction with law enforcement outside of our schools. So there is a place for law enforcement, but we do have to protect our students. We have to protect our students' rights as well. So,
Awesome. Thank you.
yes, ma'am.
Please share your thinking about organizational culture in a school district of this size and any specifics relating to organizational culture in our county.
Sure. So again, I think you have a committed community. That theme resonated repeatedly yesterday. You have committed staff. All the staff who I've interacted with are truly committed to Polk County Public Schools and their students, but they want to feel valued. So that cultural aspect is how do we grow that? How do we make sure that they do know that they're valued? How do we know that they feel respected? Salary alone, when you look at most studies, salary alone is not the greatest retention option or the biggest incentive to retain staff. They want to feel valued, they want to feel respected, they want to feel that there's progression, they want to feel that there's opportunity. And so as a school district, we have to reestablish that through open lines of communication and through establishing those collaborative structures, as I shared earlier. Collaborative council is a great opportunity for that. The Community Leadership Academy that I established is another good example of how you get parents to re-engage with your school system by having 2 of them attending from each school, and it's a two-year university. We call it a university or academy. And year 1 is spent just basically getting them up to speed on district operations, how decisions are made, why decisions are made, why do we have the curriculum we have, how does school funding work, how do we make those decisions, what's our revenue, what are our costs, because there's a lot of misconceptions out there. Year 2 is more about leadership and how do we empower them to be stronger leaders back in their school buildings, because that then magnifies our voice. You know, if you imagine if you had 2 representatives from every school in Polk County, imagine the magnitude of the impact you could have to allay or quite honestly disarm misconceptions across our communities, because those are now your advocates. And quite honestly, those you're seeding, just as you want succession leadership for school buildings, classrooms, and for your superintendent. Quite honestly, we want succession leadership and plans in place for school board members. You know, should one of you decide you have to move, or you decide not to run, or we get, there's an opportunity, there's an open board seat. Do we have people who are well informed, or are we going to have to spend a year bringing them up to speed so that they feel effective and productive as board members? And I mean no disrespect at all, but that's part of the process. Is it takes a while to become an effective board member. There's a lot to learn. If you have had no presence and no interaction with public education, it is a learning curve. And I know you serve on multiple committees, and so you are a student learner. I mean, you are very much a student of education and public policy. And so we have to provide those opportunities to others as well.
Absolutely. Thank you. A superintendent handles a variety of responsibilities. Of them, which do you feel most qualified to handle and why? And for which of the responsibilities of superintendent will you need additional support, and how do you plan to garner that support? It's one of those Fortney questions.
No, that's it. Well, it was. It was. It's an interesting question.
Thanks.
It's an interesting question. So I think I have a balanced resume. I think I have a balanced skill set. But if I have to pick one, I'm going to say instructional leadership, and I'm going to put culture there with it. I'm sorry, I'm going to tie the 2 together. Okay. My ability to establish strong relationships in a collaborative structure is well exemplified in my resume and my track record. My knowledge and expertise in instructional leadership is, again, still commensurate with that. But I will tell you right now, even though those are my 2 strongest skill sets that I believe, I will still need help. This is an incredibly large school district. Making sure that everyone speaks with a common voice, with a common understanding and common purpose is the struggle. Making sure that we're establishing what that true vision and mission is, and then how do we best exemplify that? How do we model that? How do we support and nurture that? All the way down to the classroom level, because let's be honest, there's a long road from the superintendent's office down to the classroom level. But we have to make it seamless, and we have to support that. So I will need assistance, and I will, quite honestly, I will rely on staff in a lot of areas, because you are managing a very, very large school district. So there are issues, for example, in school finance, but part of that is the process in which a superintendent establishes their cabinet and their executive cabinet. How am I getting regular updates and reports? What are my expectations? What's currently in process? And we be respectful of what they currently do. Does that meet my needs as a superintendent? And if not, how do we get there? I also have to be respectful of the fact that not everyone leads the way I lead. And I can't always expect everyone to come to me. I have to be able to meet people in the middle. So again, you are a district with a great tradition, a great history, a great heritage, and great community pride. And I will tell you, I would be the last one that wants to interfere or disrupt that. But I was most impressed by the willingness and the understanding and the acknowledgement that we too must grow while maintaining that sense of who we are and who we have been as we move forward. So I think that has to be reflected as well. So utilizing staff in an effective means through direct reporting, through regular updates that will happen in times daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly. It depends on it really does depend on the department, depends on the season of the year, it depends, all of those things are critical. Student data will be more frequent. Absenteeism, truancy, discipline data, academic performance outcomes, those indicators have to be happening in real time so we can be responsive. Others, like school finance, construction projects, those happen more monthly, more quarterly, through part of the committee process and through others, but yes, there's a reliance there on staff. I cannot be everywhere as much as I'd love to be, and I will try. You will see that. I will try. I put in the work. I'm a hands-on leader. I am not a micromanager, and I readily accept that not everyone's going to do something the way I would do it, but so long as the outcome's the same, does it really matter? And the only time it does is if it's, so long as it's done consistent with our leadership purpose and our leadership focus of, again, that collaboration, that respect. It's okay to say no, but explain the no. And that's what most people find really disruptive or disappointing is they just get what they feel is a harsh no. So,
Thank you.
you're welcome.
And last question, what is the most important part of the superintendent's job and why?
Ensuring that at the end of the day, our graduation and that diploma that we put in a student's hand means something. It means something to the student. It means something to the family. It's a quality indicator. It's something that we can be prideful of. It's not something that we just handed out casually. It's something that our community sees as an investment, as an opportunity. Again, that becomes a recruitment opportunity for us. Our growth is going to require additional services and industries, and if our school system is functioning at a high level, and that's my obligation to ensure that we're operating and that we're the best possible school system we can be. Competition exists. We're always going to compare ourselves against others, but at the end of the day, we need to be the best Polk we can be. And so that would be my focus. And again, I think as the superintendent, that's my primary responsibility. It is a balanced responsibility. Obviously, I have to make sure the financials are there, operationally we're functioning, but at the end of the day, my primary responsibility is that in a K-12 or pre-K-12 system, that diploma means something, and that those students know that they can go anywhere with that, and that's the key to opportunity. Whether it's college, career readiness, military, that's their choice. We support them in that. We need to support them in that, but it needs to mean something.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. Mr. Heid, take a breath.
Yes, ma'am.
Wanted to give you an opportunity now. If there is any additional information that you would like to share with our board this morning. If so, please feel free to do so now.
Yes, ma'am. I'll be brief. I think you got a very good sense of who I am, how I lead, what my purpose is, and how I function. I had no intention to come here to mislead you. I'm a very direct person. I'm very transparent. I'm very passionate about what we do. I wanted you to see me for who I am, to get to know me for who I am, because quite honestly, as I shared earlier, this is a relationship that we will have to nurture together as we stay committed to ensuring that Polk County Public Schools continues to thrive. And I think that honesty is needed. I don't want to, get a job and not be the person you thought you interviewed. That's the worst thing that could happen. For me as a superintendent, and the worst thing that could happen for you as a board. And so I hope that's come across today. I'm truly student-focused. I'm everything I've said I am. You've seen that on paper. You've seen that from my references. I know many of you have done your due diligence. You've reached out beyond my network of references. I've gotten feedback from others. And again, I think what you heard is a common theme. I am, who I say I am, and I'm committed. And I'm not looking for just the next job. I'm looking for the right job. This is, quite honestly, the only thing that I've looked at in several years, as you know, and I've turned down other opportunities because it was not a good fit as much as, and I mean this with all due respect, I'm interviewing you today as much as you're interviewing me.
That's right.
It has to be a good fit for both of
right.
us. I will not be the person sitting in the parking lot gripping the steering wheel at Monday morning for 20 minutes saying, I hate this, I don't want to be here. You don't want that for me as a leader, and I don't want that for me and my family, and I don't want to do a disservice to you in the community. So I hope you got a really good sense of who I am and what I represent and what I can bring to Polk County Public Schools. And I thank you again. Your hospitality thus far, the search firm has been amazing. They have held our hands, God bless them, throughout the entire event, and I look forward to the rest of today. And I, again, if chosen, and no matter who's chosen, they're truly blessed to be here in Polk County. You have an amazing school district, poised for just incredible continued success. And so kudos to you and the team that you've built. So thank you.
Thank you. And before I ask you if you have questions, could you quickly let the board know, I think when we talked last evening, could you let us know where you are in your educational journey?
Yes, ma'am. Educational journey. Yes, ma'am. The status of my doctorate. You are so polite. I appreciate that. And so I was, again, I started my doctorate back up. I had finished all my coursework through Capella University, and at the time had transitioned to Illinois. My focus was on my family and on my school district as a new leader. So I put everything aside. I re-engaged with my dissertation a little over 2 years ago. Because of the duration of my absence, there was new coursework at a new college university. I'm now with Aurora University. I've completed all my additional coursework, and I am currently in the dissertation writing process. Most of my chapters are in draft form. I hope to defend in the very near future and wrap that up by this summer. So my dissertation, if you didn't pick up on it earlier, is actually on adverse childhood experiences. I shared part of my dissertation with the search firm so they could share that with you so you knew the topic, but it is my expectation. But as I shared when asked yesterday, I'll be very candid. My family and my community and my job come first. And so while I truly believe that the doctorate is important, it has been a labor of love and other words. And I believe that some of you will understand.
Yes.
But there are priorities in life. And I will not, in COVID, my district needed me, and we needed to be, it was 24/7 for 18 months. Many of us at the point of breaking, and I laud my team. They are amazing. That is an amazing group of individuals. And if your team here is anything like that team, you're truly blessed, as I said before. But I will be wrapping up my dissertation, and again, it was my commitment to my family and my school district that had to take a priority at the time.
Thank you for sharing that.
Yes, ma'am?
Almost Dr. Heid.
Almost.
Yeah, almost Dr. Heid.
Almost.
Now, at this point, do you have any questions that you would like to ask of any of our board?
Really, I have questions, but I think they're really more appropriate, should I be offered the position. Because they're more about establishing timelines, establishing that 90-day plan, establishing what your expectations are, and how do we come to agreement on those things. So respectfully of you and your time, I think your staff have been amazing. I have been inundating them with questions throughout the day. You're very blessed. You have a great team, and they have done their research. They've all told me. I've been amazed at the network of people that some of you are well-connected people. And that goes all the way down. I mean, to the people we've interacted with at every level. I just have been thoroughly impressed. I've done the common reoccurring thing. I've done my research on you, and I've heard good things. And you've done the same thing on and I'm not just putting myself out there. I'm sure the same is true for every candidate. But kudos to them, because you don't want to be reliant on just one group or one individual doing that vetting. And so you started with the community. We went from 52 to 15, down to 10, and we're down to 7, then down to 6, then down to 5. So it's been an interesting road. But all along the way, the people here are sincerely committed, and they want the right leader. And I understand that, and I respect that. And that's why I said I want to be candid with you today. I want you to get to know who I am, how I interact with you, what my expectations are, what my passions are, what my frustrations can be. Because at the end of the day, we have to work together if selected. So thank you again.
Thank you, Mr. Heid. And I failed to mention earlier, congratulations on being a finalist and getting to this point. That
Thank you so
certainly says a
much.
lot about you and your background and your track record. And we appreciate the opportunity to get to know you here today.
Thank you.
There being no further questions, this interview will be adjourned, and I will reconvene the interview process at 11:30 for our next candidate. So thank you very much, and we'll see everyone back at 11:30.
Thank you all very much for your time today. Appreciate it.